Pathologic 2 is basically the 2019 poster boy for underplayed and underappreciated classics, which is a bit of an awkward uncanny valley to exist in. Too fringe to fall into the mainstream zeitgeist, and yet still championed by enough people who desperately want you to play it that you have to wonder how on earth so many people haven't. The original Pathologic developed a bit of a legend for itself as this brutal game where you're fighting a grueling uphill battle against fate, misery is inevitable, and the game is more than happy to bend you over its knee even when you're doing nothing wrong, because life sucks, get used to it. It will mock your every attempt to survive it, and will laugh at your attempts to understand it as the rabbit hole of madness peels back layer after layer after layer. The thing's basically the Ark of the Covenant in video game form. And Pathologic 2 is a sort of reimagining of that first game, a second shot at breaking into that mainstream zeitgeist. This time with some nicer graphics, a little less jank, and a sort of kind of overhaul of its narrative. And so far, it's been pretty well received. But for ye of little time, can all that strife still be adequately experienced and appreciated over just a few hours? We're gonna find out in just a second. As always, I'm Alex, and this is First 5, where I ask if games are worth your time, not your money. I played a game for 5 hours, and I'm gonna tell you if those were 5 hours well spent. And today, we're fighting back the plague in Pathologic 2. So alright, we've pretty much established Pathologic's rep as the rare game that'll kick you in the teeth and somehow still be entertaining enough for you to like it. But what I've found is that Pathologic 2 isn't really that much of a misery simulator. At least, not at this point it isn't. It just runs off of different rules. Death can be sudden and easy to come by, yes, but it's also just a bump in the road, not a fail state of its own. And fighting is always an option, but almost always a terrible one. Occasionally, you can screw yourself well and good, but it's not as if the game maliciously drops these roadblocks on you without warning. Like, for example, it'll warn you multiple times that if you walk into the mayor's mansion, nothing good will happen. And you can entirely ignore those warnings, even the one right before you go in. See what happens. Most of Pathologic 2's dangers come in the form of ticking clocks. There are a half-dozen survival meters to keep track of that you'll have to deal with multiple times a day. Basic stuff like food, water, and so on. But then there are the larger ticking clocks, the really important ones. See, you're racing against time to solve a plague, and your time limit is 12 days, and each day has its own independent set of tasks that you have to finish before the day runs out. And often, these bigger narrative-focused ticking clocks feel overwhelming at first glance. How are you supposed to prove you didn't commit murder in a single day when half the town's already convinced you did? Day 2 tells you must perform a good deed, but what does it even want you to do? Where do you even start? But there's always a way out, usually one even marked on your map. Finding the answer feels overwhelming because it's purposely obscured 2 or 3 branches down the questline tree, but flail around a bit and it usually reveals itself. So Pathologic 2 is, at least so far, a bit of a paper tiger when compared to its reputation. But that's okay, because the ball-busting gameplay isn't really what's gotten me invested in the game anyway. What's really fascinating is Pathologic's unique atmosphere. The little village you run around in is a pretty weird place. It's a mashup of the old and new. Ancient rites inherited from the steppes that are either spiritualism or superstition, depending on your point of view, crash headlong into the industrial age. And even this town in the corner of nowhere suddenly has to contend with the era's factories, class divides, and mass labor working man struggles. Multiple cultures bleed into one another, and your character happens to belong to the weirdest and most spiritually aligned one, a people so bizarre in their customs that talking to them almost feels like trying to learn a new dialect entirely from context clues. And then on top of it all, Pathologic 2 indulges in semi-regular fourth wall breaking that makes the whole experience even more surreal. This is a game where the earth spits corpses back out after you bury them and suddenly springs up tree roots that demand you feed them blood, where white-masked phantoms appear to give you advice and spotlights spontaneously and not so subtly spring from the ether to demand your attention. And it's a game that more or less treats all of these things with a straight face, and if you start wondering what the hell's going on, it'll give you a confused look and go, "You're a smart guy, you can figure it out, can't you?" That, or it'll quote more creepy-ass poetry at you.
Will it rain? Will it snow? Will it pass? I don't know.
The local culture is far from the only thing you'll be trying to puzzle out, however. There's a plague on, and only your medical expertise can stop the town from becoming so wholly consumed by the plague that the military just says screw it, writes it off as a loss, and bombs the entire place into oblivion. But you've also got some more blatant problems to deal with. Your character, Artemy Burak, has been summoned back to his hometown on the edge of civilization, only to be greeted by 3 knifemen. And it turns out the reason they're there is because Artemy's father just died, and the town's mostly convinced Artemy somehow killed him. So you start the game wounded, hungry, tired, and wanted in the streets. Huh, well that's a fine how do you do. Most of the first 5 hours of the game haven't even had anything to do with the plague that's about to hit town. Instead, it's been a bit of a murder mystery, with you trying to clear your name, track down your father's killer, and integrate back into a society you've left well behind. And in the process, I've had Artemy reconnect with old friends, start becoming acquainted with the customs of his people, and try to pick up from where his father left off by trying to get to know a group of kids that his father was weirdly paternal towards up until his death. The narrative's main strengths are that atmosphere I already spent half the review gushing about, and the moment-to-moment dialogue. The broad-stroke narrative beats have been perfectly serviceable, but it's in the nitty-gritty details that this game becomes truly fascinating. Whether you're trying to not embarrass yourself while navigating a foreign dialect, or trying to convince someone that you're not a murderer, there's a confrontational tension to almost every conversation that makes you choose your words carefully. Doubly so because of how conversation trees are built. Unlike what we're used to with most RPGs, you can't just go down the line of every conversation topic until you've bled a character dry of information. Once a conversation moves naturally on to the next topic, you can't just double back and revive an old one. So whatever dialogue option you pick, choosing one topic means you won't get to explore the others. And you'll regularly find yourself in a situation where there are 2 questions you want to ask, or 2 arguments you want to use to convince someone to do something, but you'll only ever get to pick one. These 2 points come together to give Pathologic 2 some of the most engaging dialogue I've ever come across in a game. Period. But with all that said, what do you actually get out of 5 hours with Pathologic 2? Those opening hours make for an engrossing introduction, but it's only just that. 5 hours got me to the end of day 2, but I haven't even gotten into the game's primary conflict. There's a ton of cool stuff going on here, and it's certainly a game I intend to keep playing. But if you can't dedicate the time to see the quest through to its completion, 5 hours probably won't satisfy much more than just idle curiosity. But as with anyone else who's ever written about Pathologic's rougher edges, I don't want that to scare you off from it. In fact, I found this reimagining far more approachable than the original's reputation ever made it out to be. Just go in expecting to have to play a bit longer than with the usual game I talk about here. But if you can block out the time for it, it's absolutely worth it. While you're here, you might want to also check out my review of Disco Elysium, which is a bit more of a laid-back but still emotionally fraught story-focused adventure. Or you may enjoy a dive into the horror HAL 9000 simulator Observation. But I hope you enjoyed this first 5 review. If you did, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button. If you're looking for games that value your time and don't pad themselves, I'm your guy. Thanks for watching this far, and I'll see you all next week.